In the first episode, when a large-chested female character gets attacked by a tentacle monster, I just thought to myself, oh boy, it's gonna be another one of these, isn't it? I stuck with it on a whim because I was slightly intrigued by the unserious tone of the series and the ridiculous main character, and to my surprise, Isekai Shikkaku, aka No Longer Allowed in Another World, ended up being better than decent, which is more than I expected. Not all entertainment has to be deep and make you question life. Sometimes I just want to watch some isekai slop. I just want to see some dude sent into another world and defeat some baddies and go pew pew with his overpowered ridiculous ability. These generic isekai have become such a staple of anime, it feels like there's at least 3 crappy new ones every season, so it's become sort of like comfort junk food for me. I'm an absolute fanboy for fantasy, so most of the time, even if the characters and writing aren't particularly compelling, I can still derive some enjoyment from these highly predictable trash series. Fortunately for me, Isekai Shikkaku quickly proves that its quirky spin on the isekai tropes make it way more entertaining than the usual garbage isekai. Let's start at the beginning. Our depressed main character gets hit by a truck, obviously, and gets sent into another world. The thing about this series is that it immediately starts making fun of the same isekai tropes that it uses, so it's very tongue-in-cheek in its tone, and it makes things go a lot smoother and also make them funnier. For example, the truck is an actual reincarnation device that they call by name, which is just so funny in the context of isekai. The tone for this series is very meta, like it's always winking at the viewer like, hey, aren't these tropes so silly? So this is definitely one of the series that you will appreciate a lot more if you've already watched a bunch of isekai previously. There's a recurring game-like notification that pops up from time to time, and it's so poorly made and looks so cheap that it just keeps getting a giggle out of me, especially because sometimes the information that it delivers is just so nonsensical. It's a nice comedic touch. The premise for this show is that our reincarnated main character is a depressed man addicted to pharmaceutical pills who just wants to end it all. So pretty much the average 30-year-old when he looks at house prices. I'm sorry, this one cut a bit too close to home. Let's get back to the Japanese cartoons. Our main character is asked to save the world from these other isekai characters that have become corrupted and driven mad by their own power. And to help him, our main character gathers a crew of capable ladies using the most powerful seduction tactic known to man: depressed artist Riz. No woman can resist the allure of a pained, tortured, depressed artist with no prospects of a future. The entire narrative of this show is the tension between our main cast of characters that wants to go save the world and do good deeds and whatever main characters do in fantasy isekai, and our main character who is not inclined to do any of that. He's not heroic because our main character doesn't necessarily want to help anybody or get involved in anything. The only time he seems motivated is when he wants to write a story of a character that he deems to be interesting, and sometimes his stories can send other isekai characters back to their original world. So yeah, the premise of this show isn't particularly mind-blowing, but what I really enjoyed was its execution. The depressed main character gimmick works really well and didn't get boring after 3 episodes like initially I cynically predicted it would be. Sensei is a presumed parody of real-life author Osamu Dazai, and his lack of will to live is actually what makes him such a compelling and interesting main character. He doesn't really care about anything, and so that makes him live life very freely and unapologetically, and that in turn is very entertaining for the viewer. Sensei isn't afraid of anything, and if anyone threatens him, he just gets super giddy and excited at his ultimate demise, and then the enemies in turn just get creeped out because what is wrong with this guy? Sensei is not a paragon of virtue, but he is very curious about people, and the only enjoyment in his life he seems to have, besides just munching down pharmaceutical pills, seems to be edging people in the right way so that they live their life to the fullest. He offers advice and nudges people in the right direction, not because he feels superior to anybody, but because he finds silly the psychological and emotional burdens that people choose to carry with them. For a main character in a fantasy series, his only real power is that he has a poisonous body, which does come up and is pretty funny when it does, but besides that he's just a normal dude. Others fight for him whenever there's a big fight, and he seems completely unbothered by this. He is so unlike every other main isekai protagonist. Throughout the series, we see his influence, which is less negative than it should be, rub off on the other characters, and in turn, we see the other characters rub off on him a little bit as well. So there's a bit of character growth. It's a little bit subtle and you only really notice it in the final episodes, but it's there. Sensei is, in every way, the star of this show, and his fascination with people is what really enhances a lot of these interpersonal conflicts. Often you will have characters trying to do the right thing, almost like this performative heroism, but Sensei always waits until he hears both sides. It's like he knows that there's always more than meets the eye, and people aren't that simple, and as a writer, I'm sure that he's used to unreliable narrators. I like Sensei. He doesn't want to be a hero or protagonist or anything of the sort, he just realizes that people make mistakes and he wants to be there to write about them. Sensei is by far the highlight of this show, as I mentioned, and unfortunately there's not much else here. The other characters are forgettable at best and cardboard cutouts at worst. The main crew doesn't really excite me. We have a large-chested priestess healer that really likes our main character. We have the sassier cat girl. We have the thief with a heart of gold with a mysterious past. If you asked ChatGPT to generate a fantasy crew, you would get something very similar to this. Sensei truly overshadows every other character, but to be quite honest, for this type of show, I don't think it's a bad thing, because if you look deeply, you will see the rest of the pool is pretty shallow. Secondary characters in this show ranged from generic to comedy relief, and I can't say I cared a lot about any of them. Even when one of our main characters has this emotional story going on, I didn't really care much about it. I just wanted to see how Sensei would handle this and how he would interject himself in the middle of this. The villains are also not the best. They range from cartoonishly evil to tragically pathetic, and to be quite honest, I really enjoyed the pathetic ones, they were much better. I really enjoyed the episodes where the villains had some sort of very human flaw like cowardice or envy that got even more amplified because of the power they weren't even mature enough to handle. I'm not going to say that this is peak fiction or anything, but underneath this very goofy, very tongue-in-cheek series, there is a very valid criticism of isekai. If you give these flawed people a ton of power, they won't become these impeccable heroes, they will just amplify the issues that they already have. Seeing Sensei just poke and completely dismantle these villains that think they're hot stuff is incredibly satisfying. The fights in Isekai Shikkaku are physical, but what really hurts is the psychological element of having Sensei just roast you and psychoanalyze you while he munches on some pills. It's just so entertaining to watch. In terms of storytelling and overall writing, I would say this series is very serviceable. It does still have a lot of the same flaws of the generic isekai that it's trying to parody, like in one of the earlier episodes they just go and meet the king because they're the hero's party or something. Things just sort of happen very suddenly with very little explanation, but you just sort of roll with it. The episode to episode continuity is sort of loose, like loosely connected events that just spring up on you all of a sudden, like, okay, I guess we're doing this now. And honestly, that's not a super bad thing. There's still a common storyline plot thread that keeps progressing throughout the episodes, but the episodes are more of an episodic storytelling, which to me, I think works best for these type of comedy parody series. It gives you more liberty and isn't necessarily as serious. Once again, I don't think anyone particularly cares about the lore of Isekai Shikkaku, so I think the episodic format works great. Overall, I enjoyed Isekai Shikkaku. It has some interesting storytelling elements that can be explored further, and has a very interesting, very funny main character. I don't want to lie to you and say that this is peak fiction and a must-watch and you must go out of your way to watch this, because it's not. It's a mid-show with clear strengths and very obvious flaws, but it was fun nonetheless. If I had to rate this show, I would say it's something like an upper C to lower B tier, something like between a 6 and a 7 out of 10, and you know, who doesn't like a sloppy quickie sometimes? Don't we all love a sloppy quickie once in a while? So, standing at 12 episodes only, this is very quick to watch, and maybe it's a fun weekend one of these days, who knows? Honestly, if this ever gets a second season, I'll probably watch it. Anyway, this was it for me today, folks. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and ciao!